So I'm going to go over some of my favorite things here in 4.3, some things that you might not be aware of. We've talked a lot in the past about the new panels on the left, or on the right, sorry, and other things, but these are some of the things that I would want to make sure that you were aware of. And the reason why I love them so much is that it makes report development easier. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about is this slice and dice panel. And that's what I call it. That's not what they call it. The reason I call it that is because it reminds me of something that we had in the desktop tool, which was called Slice and Dice. And it allowed us to rearrange objects in here very easily. So in 4.2, it became a little tricky to be able to move columns around or to rearrange or to add a new one in the right place without getting it in the header or, adding another row in there. So this panel here that they've given us is an awesome feature. So it's in the properties panel and the feeding panel. That's what SAP has called it, the feeding panel, which is appropriate. That these are all the objects from all the objects in all the queries that I have. These are the particular objects that are being used in this block of data that I have selected. Okay, so these are the objects that are feeding this particular table in this case. And it becomes very easy. Let's say I want to move customer state abbreviation into be my first column. So I can just drag and drop it in my feeding panel. And over here in my table, now customer state is my first column in there. So it becomes very easy. Now let's say, okay, I want to delete the long full customer state name. I don't need that anymore. So I can easily just click on the X here and remove it from my table. That way, I can still right click and delete in here as well. But this panel here allowing me to rearrange objects, and then I can also add objects back in here as well. So let's say, no, I actually do want customer state in here. I can bring it back in. And this time I dropped it over here beside the state abbreviation. So it becomes very easy to rearrange your objects, to add, to remove, super easy and very intuitive in my opinion. So I love that they made it easy. Since I teach web intelligence over the years, I always kind of felt bad for new users here that you had to teach them. You see that short little highlighting? Drop it now. No, don't drop it yet. So all of that became so much easier. Just use the feeding panel, rearrange your objects, drag and drop, and your table will display in that order. So I really appreciate that. Of course, the same thing works with charts. You could change the order of things in your charts the same way in this feeding panel. Okay, so that's something that I hope people take advantage of. And then along similar lines are the indicators that are shown in here. So this is the same table. However, in this case, I have added additional filters. I added a rank and I added a sort. So initially, I just want you to notice here in this submenu of my properties panel that it's showing a little indicator here, this little dot beside the filter. That's telling me that there's a filter applied to this table. There are two sorts applied to the table, and there's a rank applied. I don't have any breaks at this time. Now, if I click on the feeding panel, you'll also see those indicators on the objects themselves. So I know this has a filter, and I can see that the filter has been applied to my order year object. Likewise, there is a sort applied to my customer state object, the customer state abbreviation. There's a rank applied to my revenue. So if I want to look at any of those details, I can click on the submenu buttons up here to see how that ranking was set up. I could look at the sorts that have been applied here as well, and edit my filter if I wanted as well. So these indicators, I love that in this one view, you can tell what's going on with this table. And if you were ever given the requirement to say, rebuild this report, and it's a report that you didn't build initially, this would be a huge leg up for you to be able to rebuild that report, because you can see exactly what's going on. You see exactly what objects are included in this block of data here, and any filters, sorts, or rankings or breaks that have been applied. So I love that. These indicators are sprinkled throughout the report as well. So you will see them at various times, and I'll point them out in other indicators as well. Okay. Notice also that this one, I like that it tells you how many are applied. Later on, I'm going to show you some input controls, and and it will indicate on there how many items have been selected in that. When you choose filters and you are able to choose from a list, and you choose 3 objects, there's a little indicator in the bottom that will show you that there's 3 items that have been selected from this list. So all those little visual clues, I think, are super helpful in helping you see what's going on in your report. Okay.
Quick question, Roxanne.
Yes.
Is there a way to reorder the columns without having the formatting, e.g. the header row color, reset?
Reset. Oh. So if I apply custom color on here.
Yeah.
Okay, let's format that background. And I'll choose what color. I'll choose a light purple, just so it's real obvious. And then go back to my feeding panel. And then if I move, let's say quarter down here, it didn't lose the formatting. So I'm not.
So it looks as though you could change the columns without losing.
Yes.
Without it resetting the formatting. Excellent.
And if you are seeing that, I suspect that might have been the case in SP1 of 4.3, but not 4.2 or SP2. This version that I'm demoing today is SP2. Let's see, I think patch. Come on. There we go. So this is just SP2. I did run into a case recently where I found that, well, I can demo that here. So let's say my order quarter here, if I want to just change this to quarter. And then I move that order quarter. I'm not sure which one that is. I think it's this one. So if I move it around, now it did lose both the formatting and the custom header name that I gave it instead of just quarter. I did open a ticket about that recently and found that it has been fixed in patch 5. Patch 6 has been released recently within the last 2 weeks. So patch 6 would be the latest version. So that issue has already been resolved. Okay, so I encourage you to update to the latest version. Okay, so yes, thanks for bringing that up. It's a good thing to be aware of, and that SAP is already aware of it and they've already addressed it. Okay.
Yeah, it looks as though it is happening in SP2, but like you said, with the latest fixed packs, it's been fixed.
Yes,
great.
Exactly. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is this jump to query. So in this tab, I'm going to show how that over there. So I have several queries in here, and anytime I have multiple queries in a report, I like to change the view in my available objects or document objects here to group them together by the queries. In 4.2, this is one of the changes that we're going to talk about in a moment, but I would change it to this and it would flip back to alphabetical order. Anyway, in this view, in the query, when I have them separated by query, I could jump right to the query by clicking here and say edit. So for example, in this case, I want to go to my third query on enrollment and make some changes there. So if I click on enrollment, it's going to open up my query panel, and notice here in 4.3, our queries are listed at the top instead of the bottom, and it put me right on the third one here that I want to work on. I'm sure this has happened to others where you want to work on this query and you're focused on the changes that you want to make, but by default, it always opened to the first query in 4.2 and previously. And so you would often, our queries are very similar. So I would start making changes to this query and then run the query and realize, oh, darn, I made the change on the wrong query. So I'd have to come back, rearrange, fix this query, go to the query that I intended to make changes on, and run the query again. So a small change, and I really appreciate that. One other thing that I also just learned about this is that this option to jump to the query is really only available when you're in this query view of your objects here. So if I switch to alphabetical view, now we don't have a jump to query option here because these come from different queries. And so you would have to be in that query view in order to have that jump to the query that you want to go to. Okay. I had a colleague that was asking why she couldn't have that option in there. She wasn't seeing that option to jump to the query from here. And that's why you need to be in the query view, and then it allows you to jump to that query that you want to go to. Okay. I really like that. I think that really helps the report writer be very efficient to jump exactly to the query that they want to modify. Okay, and I recommend you using that if you haven't been using that in the past. Way back in the day, Desky used to have this option as well, where in Desky you could jump right to the query that you wanted to. Okay, so I really appreciate that they added that back in. All right, persistent is the next thing that I wanted to talk about. Many of the changes, for example, this setting here to look at your query view, in 4.2, if I set this to arrange my objects by query view, and then I logged out and logged back in, by default, it always went back to alphabetical order. Now it will stay on whichever one of these settings you had. So it won't switch to alphabetical view until you purposely click that to change your view. It stays persistent on the way you left it here. And there's many areas of that that I appreciate. All the query panel settings, any of the panels in here that you display or turn off. For example, if I turn off my data preview, it will stay off. This was something that was in 4.2 up until 4.2 SP6, I believe. You could turn off the data preview, but it always came back. And not even in the next session, anytime you edited the query again, it would be back. And so I found that really annoying, and I appreciate all these settings. So any of these panels that you turn off or turn on, they will stay like that until you make a change again. Okay, so.
Great, because you just answered one of the questions that came in, right? You know, does Webi, you know, remember the query view as alphabetic preference?
Yes.
You know, so in fact, two different people asked the question, you know, does this default to the query view rather than the alphabetic view? So thank you for addressing that, Roxanne. Thank you.
Yes. So the very first time that you open Webi 4.3, it will be in alphabetical view. If you change it to query view, it will stay in query view until you change it again. Okay, so all those changes, including these two up on the toolbar, which I want to mention next. So your query filter button here. So if I toggle that off and toggle the filter bar off, the first time I started working in 4.3, and this goes back to when we were beta testing for SAP, I couldn't figure out how to add an input control. And the problem was that my filter bar was not turned on. And so this has to be toggled on the first time, and then it stays on until you change it, okay? And the same with the filter bar. So the very first time you open 4.3, these will probably not be toggled on by default, and you have to toggle them on, and then they'll stay on until you change them, okay? So here's another one of those indicators that I wanted to mention. Notice how in this filter here that 2 years have been selected, and it tells you up here in the filter without even opening that year 2021 and one more year have been selected and are being used in this data. So just from a glance, I can tell that this is more than 1 year's worth of data being displayed, okay? This is another one of those indicators that I love that it's showing. If this is toggled on and there are filters applied like that, that's what that little dot there is, to be a visual clue for you that there are filters being used in this report that you should be aware of. So if you toggle that on, you'll see the filters there. Okay. One of the other great things, let's see. I think I'm going to show that in this next tab here. This freeze header tab, this was available in 4.2, but only in reading mode. So if you had a very long report, now you see my headers are at the top here. And so that will freeze, and I can scroll down and still see what headers are being used in my report in reading or design mode, which I really appreciate that. This is another one of those settings that stays persistent. So on this tab, I turned on the freeze headers, which is this one. So if I toggle that off, it will stay off, and now I can't see the headers until I scroll back up. If I toggle it back on, then it will stay. And I can close this report and open it up next month, and that setting will still be toggled on for me. Okay. The other thing about this report tab is that we have these cascading input controls. And in reading mode, what I wanted to show here is that I could make several selections here. Let's say I'll choose Arizona and then some cities here. And say, okay. Another thing that I'm not sure, no, we didn't have this. You could either do a search or you could have a multi-select list. Now you can do a search in here in 4.3. So I love that they included that search option in here as well. But what I wanted to mention was this reset all button. So let's say, okay, now I want to start looking at California cities and customers. I can just reset all, and all of my filters are reset in one click, and I can continue my analysis. Okay, so I really love this reset all option that they gave us in 4.3. All right, the formula editor. I love that they made some enhancements to this formula editor. So this formula that I added here, not only do we get to see this colorful annotation on here to help us in developing our formulas, but you can also include comments. For example, in here, this formula was changed, and the comment says, formula modified July 1st, 2022 per Jane Diaz, takes new territories into consideration. So I remember being involved in a migration project last year, and in the middle of the migration, as we're testing things, changes like this would inevitably come along. And I remember thinking at the time, we documented why we made these changes, but in this case, now the documentation is right with the object. So if there's any question on why did we make this change to this, to use it like this, now we know when and why, because I included that documentation with the variable. So I encourage you to use these comments with your formulas to include any information that will be helpful in the future to know why you use certain objects, why you made the change, when you made the change, and who authorized those changes. Okay, all of that can be really helpful information, and it stays with the variable for the future. So I love that in the formula editor. Among all the other, it's very easy to create your formulas now. All of these panels can be resized to be able to see. We've got plenty of room for our formula here. This wraps the text, and this turns on and off the syntax coloring. Okay, love that. All right, the advanced refresh. This is something that's not immediately obvious, but when I stumbled across this, I was very excited. So back in the Desky days, we had this option to look at the cube of data and how many rows of data were brought back by each one of the queries. And that was super helpful information for troubleshooting your queries and being able to fine-tune the data. And here we can see exactly how many rows are being brought back, how long it took for that query to run. In this case, they're all very fast, but you see the varying number of rows of data that each one brought back. If I needed to try and bring down the time on that, I could work on just a particular query. For example, here, I could make changes just to my orders query and refresh only that one at a time. Okay, so being able to refresh a single query, that was available in 4.2, but it was much harder to find that information of how many rows each query, especially to have it all succinct like that in one place. So I appreciate that they gave us that information. So that's in your advanced refresh. beside your refresh button here. Okay, so I encourage you to check that out in your reports. All right, on this tab, what I wanted to show is they added the feature to be able to hide a report tab. And this is something that's been asked for several years, many years. And they finally added the ability to hide a particular report tab. But now we have more than just the ability to hide a tab. We can hide it conditionally, which means we can use formulas. So similar to where you can hide when a particular formula is true, you can hide the report tab when a formula is true. And in this case, what I chose was the current user hide if the current user does not equal R. Pittman, which is me. And in this case, I'm logged in as administrator. So I wanted to show you if I switch to reading mode as administrator here, I am not seeing the finance tab. Okay. However, if I log in as R. Pittman, so I'll just I opened an incognito window here, and I'll log in real quick and go to that report. Oh. And as R. Pittman, I can see the finance tab. Okay, so just a thought of something I'm sure that will give you ideas of ways you could use something similar to that. So any formulas or functions that we have available to us at the report level, we can incorporate to make the tabs dynamic as well. So I love that they gave us that feature as well. All right, let's see, a couple other things that I wanted to mention. Oh, just real quick, when you add a query, one of the things that used to annoy me is, so I'll add a quick query on this universe, just bring in a couple objects and run this query. So we always got this message, right? It says, do you want to insert the table in a new report, insert it in the current report, or include the objects in the document without generating a table? And depending on what you wanted to do, you could choose those options. This first one, though, if you selected insert a table in a new report, you could say okay, and it would indeed create that new report in 4.2, but it didn't take you there. You had to go to that report tab. And I love that in 4.3, it actually takes you right to the tab that you just added that query, and now we have our data displaying on our new report tab. Another cool thing, if you've ever had a report with many report tabs and you needed to rearrange those, or you needed to add a new tab, let's say this is the main thing. So I want a new report tab right here in the middle. I could add the new report tab, and it adds the new report tab right next to the right of the one I selected. So I don't have to go to the end and move report, move report, move report. We still have the move options in here. So you still have to move kind of one at a time. But I love that if you add a new report tab here in the middle, it just goes where you want it to. So that's a real quick thing that I am glad that they added. The final thing that I want to mention here is they added some shortcut keys. And so I'm going to bring over my PowerPoint for a moment and show you these. Okay. These are all shortcut keys that they added in 4.3. The top ones are, most of these are, the delete key will delete an object when it's selected. Control Z undoes, Control Y redoes, and then your cut, copy, and paste. All of those are available. However, here we can jump right to the query panel with the Alt-Shift-Q. And then we could jump to some of our formatting panels here as well. With Alt-T takes us right to text. Alt-L will jump you right to the layout. Alt-A takes you to the appearance tab. Alt-S opens the style tab. So, and then we can also toggle between reading mode and design mode from here as well. So I'll demonstrate a couple of these just real quick. So I'm going to press Alt-1 to switch to reading mode. Let me make this. Okay, Alt-1, that moved me to reading mode, and I'll do Alt-2, and that moved me into design mode. Really nice, huh? Alt-Shift-Q, and that opened my query panel. Okay, so some fun things that you might want to play with there and get used to if you're one of those that doesn't like shaking your fingers off the keyboard. Now you have some shortcut keys and can help you do some of those tasks that we do so frequently. For example, jumping to our query panel, Alt-Shift-Q, not exactly super easy for your hand position, I think, but it gets you there. So I appreciate that. Suppose we can do two hands to get there. So I appreciate that. All right, any further questions? That is pretty much all I had planned on covering.
Yes, yes. We have questions. Okay. For the hide a report tab feature, since it's conditional, could it do something like hide the tab if there is no data present?
Yes, definitely. So definitely you could use a formula for that. Hide when a certain value is 0 or something like that. So definitely with formulas, you could do that. Yep.
Okay. Next question that came in, we're using Service Pack 2 Patch 2 and wondering if the ability to populate query prompts on the left pane in 4.2 without having to open the refresh window has remained, or are we looking for something that doesn't exist anymore?
All right, in 4.2, the ability to see your query prompts. I think that's what you're talking about here. And this report.
Yeah, to populate the query prompts on the left pane.
Okay. Let me see if I have prompts in this report. I don't have prompts, but we can add one. So let me do that real quick. All right. And was that in reading mode or just in the panel there? I can't remember whether that was.
Yeah, I think it's saying without having to open the refresh window.
I'm not seeing it. Let's check in reading mode here. You would see the prompt here. Yeah, you can then from here. Well, at least this is showing it.
Yeah.
If I reset, let's see. It doesn't, I'm not seeing the chance to choose a different one without clicking on the refresh. So you would have to come in here, I think, to choose a different year.
So you do have to refresh.
I believe so.
You have to open the refresh window, yeah. Okay.
It could be. Let me close the report and see if that makes any difference. Yeah. Yeah, I think you would have to. Yeah. Yep, I think you'd have to click on the refresh.
Okay. Also, somebody asked if it was possible for you to show again what you did there when adding a column using the feeder panel without disturbing the column format, you know, where you did the coloration there.
Okay. Switch to design mode. And again, I do encourage you to move to the latest patch. So if I color that, and then I add a new object. I think I need to delete order year and add order year back in. So that time I added it first. Let me undo that. Oops. I didn't mean that. If I add it in the middle here, order year. No, it didn't keep it that time. So, yeah, I think we need to be on a more recent patch for that. Does that help answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so it's definitely something that's only just been fixed.
It was fixed in patch 5. Sorry.
That's 5. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Can the hide a report tab be tied to a specific prompt response for distribution? For example, I have a report that client 123 does not want to see a specific report tab. Can it be hidden based on that client prompt and hide it for distribution so that the client only, for that client only, whereas show it to everybody else?
Okay. Let me see if I can recreate that idea. So my prompt response here, if I insert a prompt, and I'll save this as a variable. Okay. So I'll go to my finance tab. And on my formula here. So I'll say, where's my variable? Like a year equal to 2021. I don't know if that'll need quotes, but we'll try it. So I'll switch to reading mode. It's hidden now for 2021. And if I refresh and choose a different year, I'll choose 2020 and run that. And now finance is showing. So yes, the answer is yes. You can base it on a prompt response.
Great. Excellent. Are we able to dynamically name input controls with variables?
Dynamically name them?
Yes.
No. Yeah. To name the input control. So if I create a new input control, well, you can't dynamically name an object either. So in that case, I don't think so. The answer is no, I don't know a way of dynamically naming the input control. I mean,
Okay. Yeah, something came in on the chat session which isn't really related to the topic you just presented, but they mentioned that they've just installed 4.3 Service Pack 2 patch 4, but they're currently stuck because the CMC does not show inbox lists to the administrator account, and also doesn't let the administrator create a user or view that user list. They've obviously got a ticket open with SAP, but they are taking a long time to come back with a resolution, and they're asking if anyone else has come across that situation before. Have you seen anything like that, Roxanne?
not me personally, no.
Right. But anyone listening on the call, if you have, please, pop something in the chat there if you've seen the same thing. We have not come across it though. Obviously with a lot of new releases, patches, fixes, these kinds of things do crop up. Service Pack 3, by the way, which is due out in December, so only a couple of months away.
Yeah.
We will be doing some sessions on that at the next SpeakBO October 4th. And so you'll get to see some of the new things that are going to be coming in Service Pack 3 of BI 4.3. Okay, no more questions, Roxanne. Thank you so much. That was absolutely excellent. And let's hand back to Lucy.